So, it's me, Megan, again here from the Saskatoon Public Library, located on Treaty 6 territory in the homeland of the Métis. And I have one last section of the short story I've been reading, Mr. Botibol by Roald Dahl. And then I have a couple paragraphs from the introduction of this book about the short story. So I'll read those after the thrilling conclusion. And thank you for listening. I hope you enjoyed this story, because it's one of my favorites. So where we left off, Mr. Botibol has just shown Miss Darlington into his miniature concert hall he has set up in his home. And he's going to explain what he does there. Come back into the other room, and I'll tell you all about it. Her enthusiasm had given him confidence, and he wanted to get going. Come back and listen while I tell you something funny. And when they were seated in the sitting room again, he began at once to tell her his story. He told the whole thing, right from the beginning, how one day, listening to a symphony, he had imagined himself to be a composer, how he had stood up and started to conduct, how he had got an immense pleasure out of it, how he had done it again with similar results, and how finally he had built himself the concert hall, where already he had conducted 9 symphonies. But he cheated a little bit in the telling. He said that the only real reason he did it was in order to obtain the maximum appreciation from the music. There was only one way to listen to music, he told her. Only one way to make yourself listen to every single note and chord. You had to do 2 things at once. You had to imagine that you had composed it, and at the same time, you had to imagine that the public were hearing it for the first time. Do you think, he said, do you really think that any outsider has ever got half as great a thrill from a symphony as the composer himself when he first heard his work played by a full orchestra? No, she answered timidly. Of course not. Then become the composer. Steal his music. Take it away from him and give it to yourself. He leaned back in his chair, and for the first time, she saw him smile. He had only just thought of this new complex explanation of his conduct, but to him, it seemed a very good one, and he smiled. Well, what do you think, Miss Darlington? I must say it's very, very interesting. She was polite and puzzled, but she was a long way away from him now. Would you like to try? Oh, no, please. I wish you would. I am afraid I don't think I should be able to feel the same way as you do about it, Mr. Botibol. I don't think I have a strong enough imagination. She could see from his eyes he was disappointed. But I'd love to sit in the audience and listen while you do it, she added. When he leapt up from his chair, I've got it, he cried. A piano concerto. You play the piano, I conduct. You, the greatest pianist, the greatest in the world. First performance of my piano concerto No. 1. You playing, me conducting. A tremendous occasion. The audience will go mad. They'll be queuing all night outside the hall to get in. It'll be broadcast around the world. It'll... Mr. Botibol stopped. He stood behind the chair with both hands resting on the back of the chair, and suddenly he looked embarrassed and a trifle sheepish. I'm sorry, he said. I get worked up. You see how it is. Even the thought of another performance gets me worked up. And then plaintively, Would you, Miss Darlington, would you play a piano concerto with me? It's like children, she said, but she smiled. No one will know. No one but us will know anything about it. All right, she said at last. I'll do it. I think I'm daft, but just the same, I'll do it. It'll be a bit of a lark. Good. When? Tonight? Oh, well, I don't. Yes. Please, make it tonight. Come back and have dinner here with me, and we'll give the concert afterwards. Mr. Botibol was excited again now. We must make a few plans. Which is your favorite piano concerto, Miss Darlington? Oh, well, I should say Beethoven's Emperor. The Emperor it shall be. You will play it tonight. Come to dinner at 7. Evening dress. You must have evening dress for the concert. I've got a dancing dress, but I haven't worn it for years. You shall wear it tonight. He paused and looked at her in silence for a moment. Then quite gently he said, You're not worried, Miss Darlington. Perhaps you would rather not do it. I'm afraid I've let myself get rather carried away. I seem to have pushed you into this, and I know how stupid it must seem to you. That's better, she thought. That's much better. Now I know it's all right. Oh, no, I'm really looking forward to it. But you frightened me a bit, taking it all so seriously. When she had gone, he waited for 5 minutes, then went out into the town to the gramophone shop and bought the records of the Emperor Concerto, conductor Toscanini, soloist Horowitz. He returned at once, told his astonished butler that there would be a guest for dinner, then went upstairs and changed into his tails. She arrived at 7. She was wearing a long, sleeveless dress made of some shiny green material, and to Mr. Botibol, she did not look quite so plump or quite so plain as before. He took her straight into dinner, and in spite of the silent, disapproving manner in which Mason prowled around the table, the meal went well. She protested gaily when Mr. Botibol gave her a second glass of wine, but she didn't refuse it. She chattered away, almost without stop, throughout the 3 courses, and Mr. Botibol listened and nodded and kept refilling her glass as soon as it was half empty. Afterwards, when they were seated in the living room, Mr. Botibol said, Now, Miss Darlington, now we begin to fall into our parts. The wine, as usual, had made him happy, and the girl, who was even less used to it than the man, was not feeling so bad either. You, Miss Darlington, are the great pianist. What is your first name, Miss Darlington? Lucille, she said. The great pianist, Lucille Darlington. I am the composer Botibol. We must talk and act and think as though we are pianist and composer. What is your first name, Mr. Botibol? What does the A stand for? Angel, he answered. Not Angel. Yes, he said irritably. Angel Botibol. I think it's a most unusual and distinguished name. Are you ready, Miss Darlington? Yes. Mr. Botibol stood up and began pacing nervously up and down the room. He looked at his watch. It's nearly time to go on, he said. They tell me the place is packed, not an empty seat anywhere. I always get nervous before a concert. Do you get nervous, Miss Darlington? Oh, yes, I do, always, especially playing with you. I think they'll like it. I put everything I've got into this concerto, Miss Darlington. It nearly killed me composing it. I was ill for weeks afterwards. Poor you. It's time now. The orchestra are all in their places. Come on. He led her out and down the passage. Then he made her wait outside the door of the concert hall while he nipped in, arranged the lighting, switched on the gramophone. He came back and fetched her, and as they walked onto the stage, the applause broke out. They both stood and bowed towards the darkened auditorium, and the applause was vigorous, and it went on for a long time. Then Mr. Botibol mounted the dais, and Miss Darlington took her seat at the piano. The applause died down. Mr. Botibol held up his baton, the next record dropped, and the Emperor Concerto began. It was an astonishing affair. The thin, stalk-like Mr. Botibol, who had no shoulders, standing on the dais in his evening clothes, waving his arms about in approximate time to the music. And the plump Miss Darlington, in her shiny green dress, seated at the keyboard of the enormous piano, thumping the silent keys with both hands for all she was worth. She recognized the passages where the piano was meant to be silent, and on these occasions she folded her hands primly on her lap and stared straight ahead with a dreamy, enraptured expression on her face. Watching her, Mr. Botibol thought that she was particularly wonderful in the slow solo passages of the second movement. She allowed her hands to drift smoothly and gently up and down the keys, and she inclined her head first to one side and then the other, and once she closed her eyes for a long time while she played. During the exciting last movement, Mr. Botibol himself lost his balance and would have fallen off the platform had he not saved himself by clutching the brass rail. And in spite of everything, the concerto moved on majestically to its mighty conclusion. Then the real clapping came. Mr. Botibol walked over and took Miss Darlington by the hand and led her to the edge of the platform, and there they stood, the two of them, bowing and bowing and bowing again as the clapping and the shouting of encore continued. 4 times they left the stage and came back, and then the 5th time Mr. Botibol whispered, "It's you they want. You take this one alone." "No," she said, "it's you. Please." But he pushed her forward, and she took her call and came back and said, "Now you, they want you. Can't you hear them shouting for you?" Mr. Botibol walked alone onto the stage, bowed gravely to the right, left, and center, and came off just as the clapping stopped altogether. He led her straight back into the living room. He was breathing fast, and the sweat was pouring down all over his face. She, too, was a little breathless, and her cheeks were shining red. "A tremendous performance, Miss Darlington. Allow me to congratulate you." "But what a concerto, Mr. Botibol. What a superb concerto. You played it perfectly, Miss Darlington. You have a real feeling for my music." He was wiping the sweat from his face with a handkerchief. "And tomorrow we perform my second concerto." "Tomorrow?" "Of course. Had you forgotten, Miss Darlington? We are booked to appear together for a whole week." Oh, yes. I'm afraid I had forgotten that." "But it's all right, isn't it?" he asked anxiously. "After hearing you tonight, I could not bear to have anyone else play my music." "I think it's all right," she said. "Yes, I think that'll be all right." She looked at the clock on the mantelpiece. "My heavens, it's late. I must go. I'll never get up in the morning to get to work." "To work?" Mr. Botibol said. "To work." Then slowly, reluctantly, he forced himself back to reality. "Ah, yes, to work. Of course, you have to go to work." "I certainly do. Where do you work, Miss Darlington?" "Me? Well," now she hesitated a moment, looking at Mr. Botibol. "As a matter of fact, I work at the old academy." it is pleasant work, he said. What academy is that? I teach piano. Mr. Botibol jumped as though someone had struck him from behind with a hatpin. His mouth opened very wide. It's quite all right, she said, smiling. I've always wanted to be Horowitz. And could I please be Schnabel tomorrow? I apologize if I read any of those names wrong. Schnabel? I think that's right. Anyway, and I have a habit of saying pianist instead of pianist because my friend was trained in the piano and she performs, and she told me the correct way to say is pianist. So I say it that way. I want to read one more piece from this book from the introduction. It's about Mr. Botibol. Let's see here. The title itself invites the reader to take neither the story nor its main character seriously. This might seem a pity. Mr. Botibol's dream of becoming a concert musician, his implementation of it, and the outcome, particularly with the girl he meets in a record shop, it is all charming and unexpected, but couldn't it be handled more complicatedly, more subtle, more true? The question, one often asked about Dahl's work, misses the point. Like in a folk tale or a children's story, the extravagance of Mr. Botibol is there for its own sake. Dahl takes you into a world of self-propelling extremes, lets them escalate, gives them more than one twist, and just when readers are beginning to expect another, perhaps cruel reversal, springs a touchingly gentle surprise. There is no great distance between Mr. Botibol and the best, most innocent of Dahl's children's books, the BFG. Both involve the literally larger than life. Mr. Botibol's transformation of his flat into a lavishly equipped concert hall, and the big friendly giants being just that, and everything that flows from it. Both imagine transformative relationships of a fairy tale kind, and both are comic allegories of art. Mr. Botibol's fantasy life as a musician, the BFG's nightly task of putting dreams into people's heads. Creativity is a theme throughout Dahl's work, whether in this positive sense or in the imaginative resourcefulness with which his characters outwit and revenge themselves on each other. So now if you want to read the BFG, I believe there's lots of online copies available, and I highly recommend it. So I hope you enjoyed that. I'll be reading some more stories for grown-ups and for older readers. So check back for some of those. Thanks. Bye-bye.